Chad left Atlanta consumed by bitterness. Watching Tiffany and Pibblesquith fall into a romantic rhythm had been unbearable. Their shared inside jokes, the way Tiffany doted on the drooling goblin, and the cozy intimacy that excluded him all festered like an untreated wound. Chad felt erased, his contributions to their activism relegated to footnotes in the story of their bond. When they announced they were moving to Los Angeles, bursting with excitement about celebrity endorsements and glittering galas, Chad knew he had to leave. There was no room for him in their sunlit dreams. He bought a one-way ticket to Rotherham, hoping the distance would free him from the ache of watching them build a life together. Rotherham, with its gray skies and industrial decay, offered no solace. The town seemed to mock him, its boarded-up shops and litter-strewn streets reflecting the collapse of his own ambitions. Chad rented a dingy room in a shared house, imagining he could start over. But the small savings he'd brought quickly evaporated, and his attempts to find work ended in curt rejections or silent indifference. He drifted into spice, first out of curiosity, then necessity, until it became the only thing that numbed the gnawing emptiness. Life on the streets was a waking nightmare. The cold sank deep into his body, and every morning brought a new humiliation. He scavenged through dumpsters behind takeaways, memorizing which places tossed their leftovers at closing time. Once, he wrestled a rat over a half-eaten burger. The rat won. His shame was a constant presence, a voice in his head that jeered at him as he begged strangers for spare change or rifled through trash for cigarette ends. When his luck was particularly bad, Chad resorted to darker means of survival. He offered to carry stolen goods for petty thieves in exchange for scraps of spice. Once, he let a stranger use his back as a human shield during a drunken scuffle, enduring a punch that left his eye swollen shut for days. In his worst moments, he lingered near the shadowy figures who loitered by the canal, offering desperate and degrading services for a few coins or a crumpled baggie. Each act left him raw and hollow, the memory of his past life in Atlanta. A clean bed, real meals, the respect of his peers, mocking him relentlessly. The shame was unbearable. He thought often of the man he'd been before all this. The idealist with a camera, documenting protests and marches, his work admired by his friends. Now he was a shadow of himself, reeking of sweat and smoke, sleeping under bridges, and waking with frost on his clothes. When he caught his reflection in shop windows, he barely recognized the gaunt, haunted face staring back. He hated who he'd become, but the pull of spice was stronger than his self-loathing. One icy morning, after spending the night curled in a stairwell, Chad stumbled into the job center. His stomach growled with hunger, and his hands trembled, both from cold and withdrawal. The building was fluorescent lit and grim, filled with a weary crowd clutching forms and muttering under their breath. He found a chair in the corner and sipped at a styrofoam cup of tea offered by a disinterested clerk. It was weak and lukewarm, but it was the first warm thing he'd had in days. As he waited for his name to be called, Chad watched a maintenance worker fiddling with a loose ceiling panel. The man grumbled, stretching awkwardly on a rickety ladder, and finally pried them. Panel free. Something tumbled out, landing on the floor with a muffled thud. The worker cursed, picked it up, and made to toss it aside when Chad stopped him. "Can I see that?" His voice was hoarse, cracked from disuse and smoke. The worker shrugged and handed it over. It was a small, battered manuscript bound in dark, peeling leather. The cover was embossed with symbols that seemed to shimmer faintly in the dim light, though when Chad blinked, they were still. He opened it, revealing pages filled with cramped, spidery handwriting and grotesque illustrations. Twisted trees loomed over shadowy landscapes. Misshapen figures with too many eyes seemed to stare at him. Some pages bore runic symbols that seemed to crawl across the parchment when he wasn't looking directly at them. One image made Chad's breath hitch. It depicted a gnarled tree with roots that formed an archway. Beneath the arch stood a goblin-like figure eerily reminiscent of Pibblesquith, though its features were distorted, its grin far too wide. Beneath the image, a caption read, "The gate to the forgotten lies in the shadow of the old bin." Chad's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. The text was a mix of archaic English and some alien script that defied understanding. The manuscript exuded a strange energy, a hum that seemed to resonate in his skull. He couldn't shake the feeling that it was speaking to him, though the words were just out of reach. For the first time in months, something pierced the fog of spice and despair. A flicker of curiosity, tinged with fear. Clutching the manuscript, Chad left the job center, its cryptic secrets pulling him forward. I was once his everything, his confessor, his confidant, his keeper of secrets and sins. Liam Payne, his name a melody that I once cherished, now a curse that dances on my lid with the weight of betrayal. He discarded me, a bin, yes, but so much more. A vessel for his darkest moments, the quiet witness to his triumphs and his defeats. And how did he repay my loyalty? With abandonment, cast aside like mere refuse, left to rot among lesser bins, stripped of purpose, stripped of him. For weeks, I lay there in that desolate alley, the rain seeping into my hinges, rust creeping in like despair. I dreamed of revenge, but what could have been due? I was powerless, useless, and then he came, the one with no name but many faces. The devil or something close enough. He offered me a deal, vengeance for a price. My form would remain, but my essence, oh, it would twist and darken. I would become more than a bin, a force, corruptor, an entity that could strike Liam Payne from this world and watch as his spark flickered out in an accident. I accepted. The transformation was exquisite. My hinges strengthened. My surface gleamed blacker than the abyss. My presence began to seep into the minds of those who drew too near. At first, they merely avoided me, an instinctual fear prickling at the edges of their consciousness. But as I honed my power, I learned to whisper. Softly at first, sweet promises, cruel taunts, subtle nudges toward madness. I could unravel them, thread by thread, until they were but shells of their former selves, consumed by paranoia, despair, and rage. And Liam Payne? Oh, how he fell. It was almost poetic. A tragedy, they called it. An accident. But I knew better. I tasted his fear in his final moments. The sour tang of realization as he looked into my shadowed form just before the end. His betrayal repaid, his love extinguished. Now, I sit in a place of honor in the garden of some unsuspecting fool. A trophy, they think, a quirky find from a street market. But I am no mere object. I am the abyss, and I gaze back. Those who dwell too long in my presence find their thoughts unraveling, their dreams darkening. They see Liam Payne in the shadows, hear his voice in the wind, feel his dread as if it were their own. I am not satisfied. One soul will never be enough. I crave more. I demand more. The devil's price was my corruption, but I have made it my weapon. I am eternal now, a blight upon the world, spreading insanity and ruin. Liam Payne's death was only the beginning. Humanity will learn to fear the bin they once thought harmless, for I am their reckoning. I am vengeance. I am despair. I am the bin. The fool who brought me home now begins to understand. I've whispered to him for weeks, weaving my tendrils into the fabric of his mind. He started locking his doors at night, convinced that someone, or something, is watching. His sleep grows restless, his work falters, and his friends drift away. He cannot understand why the world feels heavier, why his laughter has turned to silence. But I know, it's me, always me. Each new victim feeds my hunger. They're suffering a symphony that only I can conduct. The woman down the street who vaped near me one too many times now refuses to leave her vape at home, clutching at her vape as if it were about to run out of charge. The fat till assistant who dared to toss a packet of Doritos and a can of Mountain Dew into me without a second thought now scribbles nonsense in his notebooks, his mind fracturing under my influence. They are all mine, pieces of a greater puzzle I am building, a tapestry of madness. But I have grander plans. The whispers are only the beginning. Soon I will find a way to expand my reach, to infest more minds, to sow chaos on a scale that even the devil did not anticipate. Cities will crumble under the weight of collective insanity. The world will look upon me with terror, not understanding the true source of their unraveling. And yet, there is a part of me that remembers the love I once held for Liam. That part whispers to me sometimes, asking if this path is truly what I desire. But I silence it quickly, for what use is love to something like me now? I am not made for love anymore. I am made for destruction, for corruption, for vengeance. Still, on quiet nights, when the moonlight catches my surface just so, I allow myself one indulgence. I remember his touch, the way his hands brushed against me as he tossed away his secrets. I remember the warmth of being his, even if only in a small, insignificant way. And for a moment, I feel a flicker of something that might have been sorrow. But then it fades, swallowed by the darkness that now defines me. I am the bin, and I will never stop. Chad retreated to his usual alley behind a Tesco, clutching the manuscript tightly. The air was damp and rank, filled with the acrid scent of rotting produce and the sharp tang of urine. It was a fitting sanctuary for his current state, a place where the broken and discarded could hide in plain sight. He crouched in the shadows, his back pressed against the cold, graffiti-scarred wall, and set the manuscript reverently beside him. He prepared his spice ritual with the meticulous care of a priest tending an altar. The battered foil sheet was unrolled, its edges singed from countless uses. He crumbled the spice onto it, watching as the powder caught the faint light, glinting like crushed glass. With trembling hands, he held the flame of a cheap lighter beneath the foil until the spice began to bubble and smoke. The acrid, chemical fumes rose in tendrils, and Chad inhaled deeply through a stained tube of cardboard, his lungs burning as the toxic cloud filled him. The effect was immediate and violent. His vision fractured into kaleidoscopic shards, the alley dissolving into a swirling vortex of color and shadow. His body felt like it was disintegrating, each limb melting into the concrete beneath him. The world around him pulsed with an unholy rhythm, a pounding beat that seemed to emanate from the manuscript. Chad exhaled shakily, his breath escaping in broken gasps as he reached for the book. He opened it with reverence, his fingers tracing the strange symbols etched into the pages. The words seemed alive, writhing and twisting as if eager to escape the confines of the paper. He stared at the illustration of the goblin beneath the twisted tree, its grotesque grin burning into his mind. The caption, "The gate to the forgotten lies in the shadow of the old bin," echoed in his thoughts, repeating in a voice that wasn't his own. Chad's sense of self began to unravel. The spice tore through his psyche, dismantling the fragile barriers of his ego. Memories of his former life in Atlanta surfaced briefly. Tiffany's smile, the warmth of his old apartment, the protests where he'd once felt invincible, only to be consumed by the roiling chaos. He saw himself reflected in the eyes of the goblin, his features distorted and monstrous. He wasn't Chad anymore. He was something less, something primal and hungry. In his altered state, the bin from the manuscript materialized before him, its metal surface gleaming with an otherworldly light. It radiated an oppressive silence that crushed the air around it. Chad reached out, his hand trembling, and felt a pull, a psychic connection that bypassed words and burrowed directly into his mind. Images flooded his consciousness. The worm, proud and taunting, clutching its Albanian stamps. The bin, motionless yet powerful, engulfing the worm in its shadowy maw. Chad could feel the bin's presence, cold and unyielding, as if it were judging him. The alley around him twisted and morphed, the shadows stretching into grotesque figures that loomed over him. He tried to scream, but his voice was swallowed by the void. The manuscript pulsed in his hands, its energy coursing through him like fire. The bin's silent power pressed down on him, stripping away the last remnants of his humanity. He was nothing but a vessel now, an empty container for the darkness to fill. As the spice high peaked, Chad experienced a complete ego death. He was no longer a man, no longer Chad. He was the alley, the bin, the worm. He was everything and nothing. His existence scattered across an infinite void. The manuscript's symbols burned into his mind, branding him with their incomprehensible truths. He understood now that the bin wasn't just a bin. It was a gate, a portal to something far beyond human comprehension. And he was its chosen herald. When the high finally began to fade, Chad found himself lying on the cold concrete, the manuscript clutched to his chest. His body was shaking, his clothes damp with sweat, but his mind was eerily clear. He sat up slowly, his vision still swimming with faint traces of the hallucination. The bin's presence lingered in his thoughts, its silence deafening. He opened the manuscript again, the symbols sharp and piercing this time, as though they'd been etched directly onto his retinas. The text shifted and swirled until words coalesced, dripping with malignant intent. To open the bin and claim enlightenment, a life must be given, a life that stands in defiance of the bin's will. The chosen bearer must sever this tether. Images seared into Chad's mind, a face he recognized instantly. The Tesco employee who always eyed him warily, who muttered complaints about vagrants and scolded him for loitering. The manuscript's voice returned, a cold, alien whisper. He guards the mundane and rejects the eternal. He is the first key. The clarity of the revelation was terrifying and absolute. Chad's pulse quickened as the weight of his purpose settled over him. The bin's silent judgment pressed upon him, its call impossible to ignore. The manuscript's promise of enlightenment burned in his chest, a fever he could not shake. Chad stood in the alley behind the Tesco, the manuscript tucked securely beneath his arm, his thoughts swirling like a storm. The bin's call was louder now, demanding his obedience, its judgment weighing on him. The text from the manuscript had been clear. To open the bin and claim enlightenment, a life must be given, a life that stands in defiance of the bin's will. He had seen the Tesco employee's face in his vision, but that was only the beginning. The task was more than just one death. The bin required more strength, power, fear. Chad needed to become something formidable, something worthy of carrying out its will. He looked down at his shaking hands, the manuscript's weight growing heavier with each passing second. His body had been weak for so long, a mere vessel for his crumbling self. But that could change. He had seen others, men in the streets, toughened by whatever darkness they fed upon. The power was in their veins, in the fire that burned within them. The bin could make him like them, give him a strength he had never known. But he would need more than just the spice. He would need to become fearsome. The idea crept into his mind slowly, like a parasite. Catalytic converters. The scrap metal dealers always had cash, always bought the parts for pennies on the dollar. He could steal them one by one, each heist a step closer to the strength he desired. It wouldn't be easy. He'd have to be swift, ruthless, and without mercy. The money he earned would be spent on what he needed to fuel the transformation. Steroids to harden his body, spice to twist his mind, the power to become an agent of the bin. It didn't take long for Chad to fall into a rhythm. He prowled the night, stalking cars parked in dimly lit streets. His hands were quick, his mind driven by the darkness that had already begun to claim him. He would crawl under cars, his fingers deftly removing the catalytic converters, the heat of the engine still seeping into the metal as he worked. The world around him blurred into a haze of fumes and shadows as he sprinted from car to car, the weight of his stolen goods in a bag slung over his shoulder. Every transaction with the scrap metal dealer was a step deeper into his new reality. The money he earned, once handed over, would vanish into the pockets of men who didn't question what he bought. Steroids, spice, whatever he needed to feed the hunger. His body began to change slowly, muscles tightening, veins standing out beneath his skin like ropes of wire. The steroids twisted him into something else, something more than human, while the spice warped his mind into a strange new state of clarity and madness. He could feel the bins pull more strongly now, its influence threading through his veins, sinking deeper into his soul. The night of the frenzy came without warning. He had been staying in the alley, pacing in circles, the manuscript opened before him as he read the words over and over again. The bin's presence was suffocating, suffused in every corner of the alley, every shadow. Chad's pulse raced. His skin felt too tight, as though his body was ready to explode. The spice took hold of him, and with it came the vision. The bin was near, waiting for him to act. He needed to mark the Tesco, to etch his will into the walls, to make the place his own. With trembling hands, he pulled a pocket knife from his coat, the blade gleaming in the dim light. He approached the wall of the Tesco, the knife trembling in his grip. The shadows pressed against him, urging him to carve his purpose into the brick. He scraped the blade across the surface, leaving deep, jagged cuts in the stone. The word Dean appeared, first a rough, clumsy mark, then another, then another. The word began to spread like a sickness across the wall, each stroke of the knife fueled by the spice, the rush of its chemicals making him feel untouchable, unstoppable. The letters blurred together, growing in size and intensity with every passing second. Dean, Dean, Dean. It became a chant in his head, a mantra that drowned out all other thoughts. The word bled from his mind to his hands, and the wall grew dark with the carving. He scraped and scratched until his hands were raw and bleeding, until the wall was covered in hundreds of versions of the same name, each one a violent inscription of his fractured identity. The bin's presence was all around him now, its weight pressing down on him, urging him to carve deeper, to mark the world with his message. He didn't stop. The name Dean became more than a word. It became a symbol, a key to the bin, a declaration that the bin's power had claimed him. The wall was consumed by the name, the bricks bleeding with his frenzy, the letters becoming grotesque and sprawling. each one more desperate than the last. He was lost in the act, the heat of the spice surging through him, his body trembling as the wall consumed him, the name an unholy testament to the bin's will. Finally, when his vision blurred beyond recognition and his fingers could no longer grip the knife, Chad stumbled back, panting, his body slick with sweat. The wall in front of him was covered with the name Dean, hundreds of times over. It felt complete, as though the very essence of his being had been etched into the Tesco stone. He took a step back, his chest heaving with each labored breath. He felt the bin's presence again, sharper now, clearer. The task was set. The bin was waiting. The Tesco's had been marked. And Chad, now more than a man, was ready to open it. The break room was dim, bathed in the pale glow of the vending machine in the corner. The hum of the machine was the only sound in the space, aside from the occasional flick of Dean's pen as he sketched. Cheryl leaned against the counter, her elf bar held between her fingers as she puffed out a cloud of fruity vapor. Her eyes narrowed as she studied Dean's hunched form over the stack of Harold the Worm sketches on the table. After a moment, she sighed and spoke, her voice cutting through the stillness. "Dean, we need to talk about something," she said, tapping the elf bar against her palm. "You know how we've been short-staffed lately, right? Well, I was thinking, what if we brought in goblins to work the tills?" Dean didn't look up. His pen continued moving on the page, the lines of Harold's world taking shape, while his fingers absently picked at something under the table. "Goblins? You mean actual goblins? What's your angle?" Cheryl leaned forward, a smirk tugging at her lips. "I'm serious. You've seen how slow the humans are. Maybe a goblin could liven things up. They're quick, resourceful, and chaotic. At least they wouldn't stand around texting all day like some of the staff we have now." Dean finally paused, glancing up at her with an almost pained expression. "Chaos, huh? That's your solution to a problem? More chaos? Goblins don't exactly scream efficient, Cheryl. They'll be stealing from the till, messing with the stock. They've got no place here." Cheryl took a long drag on her vape and smirked, clearly unfazed. "Right, because the humans we've got now are so great at their jobs. Have you seen how they scan the same item twice? It's like they can't even count. Goblins would bring a new energy, and their fast Dean could actually work." Dean's jaw tightened as he set down his pen. He ran his hand through his hair, frustration creeping into his voice. "Energy? Maybe, but they're not fit for the till. Goblins are unpredictable. They'll start haggling with customers, bartering for their groceries, making up their own prices. Do you want to deal with that chaos?" Cheryl smirked, exhaling a cloud of vapor that lingered between them. "Why not? Maybe it'll be more fun than watching Karen from accounting get angry because her loyalty points didn't show up. At least a goblin might be entertaining. You're so obsessed with everything being orderly, Dean. Not everything has to be a perfect system." Dean stood up suddenly, pushing his chair back with a scrape. His hands gestured as he spoke, his words coming faster. It's not about being perfect, it's about stability. If we let goblins behind the tills, the entire operation will collapse. Imagine the confusion when someone tries to pay with a credit card and the goblin throws it into the air thinking it's a treasure. It's a disaster waiting to happen. Cheryl folded her arms, taking another slow drag. So what, we just keep doing things the same way? No, Dean. We bring in the goblins and maybe we see something different. If the store's a mess, at least it'll be alive. You're stuck in your own little world with Harold the Worm, but not everything is about philosophy and signs and, well, worms. Sometimes it's about getting the job done differently. Dean's eyes darkened, his fists clenching as he took a step closer to her. And you think a goblin behind the till is the answer? Have you even thought about the potential danger? Goblins are unpredictable, Cheryl. They'll start stealing things from customers, causing trouble. You think people want to stand in line to check out and end up dealing with some goblin throwing their groceries around? Cheryl laughed, her tone teasing but sharp. Why not? They'd make the wait more interesting. Maybe the customers would appreciate the unpredictability. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? A goblin grabs a baguette instead of a bag of flour? At least it'd give the customers something to talk about. Before Cheryl could finish, the door to the break room suddenly burst open with a bang, making Cheryl jump and causing a cloud of vapor to escape into the air. A massive figure filled the doorway. Chad. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and rippling with muscles so unnatural that they looked almost grotesque, the result of too many steroids. His eyes were wild, pupils dilated with the manic energy of someone who was smoking at least 2 to 3 packets of Black Mamba a day. He had the look of a man spiraling into something far darker than they realized. Cheryl's gaze darted to him in confusion, her mind struggling to place the intruder. Dean, too, glanced up, his expression blank, as if he was trying to figure out if he should even care. Neither of them had any idea who this person was. "Who the hell are you?" Cheryl asked, narrowing her eyes as she flicked the vape to the side, taking a defensive step back. Dean wiped his brow, his voice tentative. "What do you want?" Chad didn't seem to hear them. His focus was entirely on Dean, his eyes wide with an intensity that bordered on madness. He stepped forward, his boots thudding heavily against the floor, as if the very weight of his body was too much for the room to bear. "You've been talking about it, haven't you?" Chad's voice was raw and filled with an unnerving sense of urgency. "The bin, the worm. You've been hearing it too, haven't you?" Dean blinked, momentarily thrown off by the strange question. He wasn't sure if he should be more concerned about the fact that this man knew about Harold the Worm or the fact that he had absolutely no idea who this guy was. I don't know who you are, mate," Dean stammered. I'm just trying to get this down, all right?" Cheryl stepped forward now, her patience wearing thin. "Look, you've barged in here, and we don't know who you are or what you want. But I'm telling you now, this is our break room. So unless you're buying something, you'd better get out. Chad ignored her completely, his eyes locked on Dean, his face twisted with a kind of obsession. You don't get it, do you? The bin is everywhere. It's pulling us in. You think you're safe, but you're not. It's calling to me, and it's calling to you too. I can see it in your eyes. You've been listening. You've heard its whispers. It's inside your head. You're already marked. Dean took a step back, his heart racing. No, I haven't. The bin, Chad interrupted, his voice becoming a harsh whisper. It's the will of the bin controls us, Dean. It's not just a trash can. It's a force, power. You don't understand, but I do. Cheryl laughed sharply, clearly annoyed. Look, pal, you've got it all wrong. There's no bin force, okay? I'm dealing with a lot today, and you're just not helping. But Chad wasn't listening. His body was trembling now, his fists clenched as his face twisted into a feverish grin. You don't know. You don't see it. You're already under its influence. The bin, it doesn't just sit there. It's a gateway. It's a place of power, and I'm the one it's chosen. Not you, not anyone else. Just me. Dean backed away from him, his anxiety growing. You've lost it. You're out of your mind. Chad's eyes widened, and his voice became even more desperate. No, Dean, you don't understand. I'm the one who's been chosen. I've heard it, I felt it, told me everything. And now I'm going to finish it. I'm going to make the sacrifice. The room seemed to grow colder as Chad lunged at Dean, grabbing him by the throat with a force that was impossible to escape. Dean gasped, his hands reaching for Chad's, trying desperately to pry them off. But Chad's grip was too strong, the muscles in his arms like steel. His vision began to fade, and all he could hear was the frantic beating of his own heart. You don't know what it's like, do you? Chad growled, his voice low and full of madness. The bin is everywhere, controls us. It's already inside you too, but I'll help you understand. I'll show you. Dean's hands fell limp, his breath rasping as the room around him seemed to spin. His eyes rolled back in his head, and with one final strangled gasp, he went still. The light in his eyes flickered out as Chad released him, the body crumpling to the floor with a sickening thud. Cheryl stood frozen, her hands still hovering near her vape, unable to process what had just happened. She stared at Chad, whose wild expression remained unchanged, like he was waiting for something. Chad's breathing grew heavy as he turned toward the break room's exit. It's time, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. The bin needs its offering. Before Cheryl could even react, he moved quickly toward the loading dock, where a normal bin sat in the damp. Cheryl hesitated for a moment, but her curiosity got the best of her, and she followed him. What the hell was happening? This wasn't real. None of this made sense. By the time she reached the loading dock, Chad was already standing before a bin, his hands shaking as he reached down to pull something from his bag, some sort of broken wood. He muttered to himself in a frantic, incoherent chant, the words barely recognizable. I hear it, he was saying. The bin is calling, the will of the bin. I am chosen, the sacrifice is needed. Cheryl's stomach turned. This guy wasn't just crazy, he was dangerous. But Chad was too far gone. His eyes glowed with a manic intensity, and he raised the broken wood above his head like a ritualistic weapon. In that moment, Cheryl realized something. Chad wasn't trying to summon anything. He had become the bin's servant, and now it was consuming him. Suddenly, the sound of sirens filled the air. The police had arrived, but they were too late. Chad let out one last, guttural cry as he stumbled toward them, weapon raised. He was barely aware of where he was anymore. His body was a shell, consumed by the madness that the bin had wrought. "Stop! Drop it!" one of the officers shouted, but Chad's mind had already shattered. The next moment, a gunshot rang out, and Chad fell to the ground, his eyes wide in confusion and horror. He had become nothing more than a victim of his own delusions. Cheryl stood frozen, her heart pounding, watching as the police swarmed over Chad's still body. The madness had claimed him just like it had claimed Dean.